Hi, everyone. This is Jason I am the owner and travel butler with Travel Simplicity. I'm very happy to be with you again and have Laura with me again. If you haven't checked it out before, she's a friend of mine and she happens to have lived on the continent of Antarctica for 5 years. So she has some fascinating stories. We're going to talk with her today and hear some more. So Laura, welcome.
Hi, how is everybody today? How are you, Jason?
Doing really well, thank you. You were just
Good.
asking me just before we started about the background. This is my backyard. So yeah, we wanted to give you a little bit of a slice of my world too. So
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's definitely something you don't see in Antarctica, right? No trees at all. In fact, the side where I lived, it's very rare to see green. One time some like moss, like a little moss grew out in a little pond. And we were like, there's green, like green grew. It was big news in town. Big news.
very nice. Everyone collects around it and kind of looks, stares at
Yeah,
it for a couple minutes.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, I put some pictures together today to go through and crawl into Antarctica a bit more if you want
I
to
love
see.
that. Please, yeah,
Yeah,
show them.
give me 1 second. Let me share my screen and get this set up. But it doesn't.
Oh, hold on a second. I've got to
Yeah, give
allow
us
you.
one.
There you go.
Okay, okay, ready. 1 sec. Let me get there. Oops, I've lost my mouse. We've got this. We've got this. I promise. We're here. Okay. And you guys can see my screen now, yeah?
Yep, yeah. Oh, there you go.
Great. So, last week we talked a little bit about what I did in Antarctica. So I wanted to give you a bit more visual of that. And,
Okay.
this is me here and driving out in the Terra bus. And I just kind of thought today I'd talk a bit more before we really crawl into McMurdo Station and the science and the continent of Antarctica and the history and the wildlife and all of the stories. I just kind of wanted to give you an overview of why I love it, right? Like introduce you to a little bit of the magic of the ice today. So that's kind of what I put together, right? So like we talked about, I'm
Ivan.
down there. Yeah, I'm working for the National Science Foundation, and I work in the shuttles department and drive passenger transport. And drive these big beasts and get people off of the aircrafts. And I drive on roads made of snow into town,
I
and then
want
we're
to.
at
I want to
McMurdo
call.
Station.
Okay, you went. That's great. Go back to the picture of the plane though that was in the sky. So are those? So it lands on skis?
Yeah, excellent question. It'd be fascinating one day just to crawl into the aircrafts and the vessels and the different transportation down there. Excuse me. But this is the LC-130, and it's operated by the Air National Guards out of New York. The 139th and 119th, and this is the only place in the world that these aircrafts land on skis. Here, as well as Greenland, where they go up and practice in the off season, they fly up there. But same guys, so they actually have wheels too. The ski goes up and down because sometimes these planes, they go from New Zealand to Antarctica, so they're landing from ice to pavement. So it goes up and down, so you've got ice and ski.
Wow. I can't imagine landing an airplane on ice.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. And these guys, um, in town, there's groomed runways, right? Like the loaders and heavy equipment keep them groomed. But these guys are like flying cowboys. They'll fly out to remote field camps around the continent, and they don't land on runways. They just land, right? They circle and they find a good place to land, and it can be pretty exciting. And every once in a while, they'll do takeoffs where they have to have a jetpack attached to the back of the airplane to give them enough gumption, so to speak, because the skis plow in the snow, so they can't go fast enough to take off
Enough lift.
sometimes unless they have that jetpack. to kind of, attach a rocket to it and shoot it down the
Yeah,
runway.
literally, like, let's just strap a rocket to the back of the plane. Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great. That's,
right.
love it.
Yeah, yeah. The airplanes and the vessels and the boats and everything down there is fun because it's just different, right? It doesn't look like anywhere else. So, yeah, you're out at the ice, you're in these wild airplanes and big machines, and then you're down at the bottom of the world. But it's like I thought about, there's so much involved, but it's that I think the simple like first is like, let's get fascinated about it. Like, so I just wanted to kind of inspire you about some of the sites around town, right? Like this is a pressure ridge field where we go out and we hike around, and the sea ice is pushing against the island and makes these amazing formations that's almost like you're walking through a botanical field because it's changing every day. It's like a living ice field, you know, um, and you can go out and hike around out here. And this is right out of town, and just beautiful, the palettes of the colors. And it's silent and all you hear is the wind. This is Mount Erebus. This is the most active southern volcano in the world. It's You can see it from almost all angles in McMurdo. Well, I mean, as long as you can see farther than your hand that day, but it's always there looming. And just these amazing ice formations of this faraway place. And this is part of just kind of the magic of Antarctica, because it
That's
doesn't
amazing.
doesn't look like anywhere else, right? Like this picture, this is the Royal Society mountain range. This is the mountains right outside of McMurdo Station. And this picture was actually shot at about 3 a.m. Because in the Australian summer, it's sunlight 24 hours a day. So from about like, mid-December to February, no, more like early December to February, you can't tell the difference between noon and midnight. It's just like 24 hours a day of sunlight. But then in the side seasons, you'll start to see some variations in colors in the sky. Mid-February, you'll start to get this amazing range of sunset colors, or really sunrise actually, because it'll be the first sunrise from like 2 a.m. till 5 a.m. So you see some incredible color and light out there.
So how do you deal with that? I mean, is it just, blackout curtains and like, how do you sleep? And how do you, I know I was
Mhm.
just, I was able to experience just a small portion of that in Iceland a couple years ago. And the sun did go below the horizon, but it just barely dipped, and it was still light out. And
Yeah,
it was weird to me, having never
it
experienced that, because the passage of time, it's like you typically
yeah.
associate it with the sun moving across the sky and going down and
Yeah.
coming up. And when that's not happening, you're like, what's happening?
I mean, some days you joke like, we're it's the longest day of the year sort of thing. But yeah, it's you adjust to it. I really struggled with that my first season. Just kind of the fact that it's always light, and it gives you energy, right? Like you're tired and you crawl out of a dark room or one of the bars to go home, and then you go outside and it's bright again and freezing. So it's like, now you don't want to go to bed again. But yeah, you have blackout shades. We had a window in our room. Not all the rooms have windows. Um, and we would just say like, are you ready to make it daytime? And we'd put the shade up in the morning. And at night, it's like, are you ready for it to be nighttime? We put the shade down. And so you just kind of, adapt and get used to it. Because there's light 24 hours a day, the station operates 24 hours a day in the summer. So it's never still. There's always activity, and there's a mid-rat shift, right? So most people work town hours, which are 7:30 in the morning till 5:30 in the afternoon. But then there's a lot of departments like ATO, the air transportation department I'm in. We work 24 hours a day. So halfway through the shift, or through the season, excuse me, some people, not everybody, but I've done it a couple of times, you flip over and you go from working during the day to being a mid-rat, and then you work the mid-rat shift for a couple months. So it's you and about 100 other people awake at the end of the earth for 2 months. and and it's pretty amazing. It's really confusing when you work the other shift to keep like today and yesterday. Like it becomes very confusing when your day starts one day and ends the next day on a regular basis. Like but it's interesting. It teaches you that time is simply a number on the clock, right? It tells you when you need to be somewhere. Like
Right?
that's no. So that's a long story to light. Inferno. I'll shoot some of these pictures. But again, this is going to be in the wee hours of the morning in one of the ends of the season. This is at the end of the season because the sea ice would have melted, so we were beachfront property, and this is when it's freezing again on the seashore. So you get this pancake ice and these textures because during the day it'll be more waves and then it'll freeze up. Um, so you just see
I would
amazing ice.
imagine that's, what about the danger of the ice as far as like walking on it or going near it or
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of training, a lot of flagged areas, a lot of places you don't go, a lot of places you can go, a lot of things you have to watch for. It depends what you're doing, really your levels of ice training you have and where you're allowed to go and how you cross it and how you do sea ice drilling to, those big vehicles I drove. If I also was a volunteer guide for the rec department, so I'd take people out on excursions. So I'd have to get out, like if we'd see a crack in the ice because it's a route not traveled. You'd have to get out and like drill and measure the cracks and make sure that there's like the density basically for your big vehicle to pass over and not smash through. And
wow.
yeah, it's a whole different thing. And sometimes it's just simply melting, so you just have to power through. That's a whole other thing. Just like driving down there is a whole different world.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, and
These
then you've got the wildlife, right? Like,
Did you take all these pictures?
yeah, these are all my pictures
That's incredible.
of of life down there. And it's just, I think, because there's so many things we can talk about it when it comes to Antarctica, because it's always fascinating. But I think a lot of times people wonder why, right? Like they don't really get Antarctica. So I thought before we really talked much about Antarctica, it's like, let me show you why. Like, because it's beautiful. It doesn't look like anything else, you know. And the wildlife is often everywhere, especially when the ice starts to melt. These are emperor penguins that came in and they were molting. So they stayed here for a couple weeks. This again is at like 3 in the morning. So when I was driving, the road is about 14 miles from town out to the airfield. And so I would be out here by myself in the middle of the night, knowing that there's no human within at least a 10-mile radius. It's just like, it's a different world. Um, and you're out in it. When the ice melts, we get really lucky and get orcas visiting, which is always my favorite time when the orcas come to visit. Um, they're not always there, but they are. We also have a lot of wetland seals. A fun thing about driving for me and being a guide was I was able to really monitor a lot of the seal activity, and I could see when they had babies and where they were moving along, and it's kind of like our little pets. And
What an incredible opportunity to be a part of that and see the sight
yeah,
of these animals.
it's amazing that you're just part of their world, and they're not scared because they've never been harmed down there, right? So you're in this place where man and animal, and they're not dangerous. I mean, on the other side of the continent, which we can get into, there's leopard seals around. You don't want to mess with those.
Okay.
But where we are, I mean, you can't go up and pet them. There's rules and regulations and whatnot. You've got to keep your distance. But yeah, they're not scared, and then you just get out, right? Like this is just out for a walk. You're just in this just it's just kind of this wild space, um and it looks different all the time because the weather changes it. One day this is bright blue, 1 hour the next hour you might not be able to see your hand in front of your face. Just like how the weather moves around there is really incredible. And kind of how we touched on a little bit before. And we could do a whole little thing just on recreation down there. But if you're not working, you're not having fun, which is a great way to live life. And
I
yeah,
love I love that picture right after the other one. That's perfect.
yeah. So that's kind of what I brought to share with you today. Just kind of like why I love being down there, and the beauty of the continent and around the place. And um, and Antarctica is just one place that doesn't look like anywhere else. So many places, there's so many similarities. Southeast Asia, everything's a little bit similar everywhere. Like, yeah, there's all these comparisons all over the world, but to Antarctica, really nothing quite compares.
Well, Laura, thank you for
Yeah.
sharing. That is beautiful. Um,
Yeah, my pleasure.
it's I can see why it's something that has a special place in your heart. I can tell why it's a place that you continue to go back to, and
Yeah.
just seeing the images. And the interesting, I think it's interesting how it's almost a color palette. There's whites and blues and greens, but it's still very
Yeah,
interesting because you have
it's true.
you have all these varying shades of it, so it's not
Hmm.
boring either.
No, and the shades of blue you see down there are just like, right, I've never seen shades of blue like that anywhere else. You're right, the palette is very varying, even though it's within similars. And I also noticed too, especially as a photographer, my eye down there would start seeing different things, right? I'd see more textures and shapes because there wasn't color distracting it. So it's interesting when it does.
Well, thank you for joining us again. It's truly a pleasure, and
Thanks.
we'll have to continue this conversation.